Hello, Neil and Buzz. I'm talking to you by telephone from the Oval Room at the White House. And this certainly has to be the most historic telephone call ever made.
This is in East Berlin, and the sound that you hear and what you're seeing tonight, not hammers and sickles, but hammers and chisels as young people take down this wall bit by bit.
History isn't all impressive tour de forces. It is a collection of stories and facts with varying reflections on mankind's decency. Some stories show the hardships humans had to bear, and others show human cruelty. Both of these are manifested in the Little Rock Nine crisis of 1957, where 9 African Americans rose tensions when they were given the option to integrate at Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. The events that transpired regarding the Little Rock Nine was influential to the civil rights movement and aided the advancement of racial equality. Little Rock Nine incident has shaped our country to who we are, but has also left a burning question in our throats. Just how effective was desegregation? African Americans were enslaved in America for over 100 years and were eventually legally freed in the later part of the 19th century. Despite not being deemed property anymore, there were still racial tensions and discrimination against them for solely having darker skin. African Americans to white people were considered inferior, and shouts of separate but equal adorned the Southern gentleman's vocabulary. African Americans had and still do have the cards stacked against them in almost every way. The Jim Crow laws ensnared the African Americans, particularly in the Deep South, and they were often barred from many establishments declared as white only. Films, literature, restrooms, drinking fountains, etc. are much of the liberties that the whites had separate establishments for the African Americans, if any. Racism held deep roots across America, but it was most firmly held in the Deep South. The 20th century was a progressive time as the woman emerged from the chains of the cult of domesticity and with the Roe v. Wade decision. Unfortunately, it came only after great sacrifice and resistance from the Anglo-Saxon frontier with a blooming civil rights movement. In 1954, in the Brown v. Board of Education, it ruled that public school segregation was unconstitutional. Following this decision, some parents removed their children from the schools and placed them in segregation academies. Then in 1956, the Southern Manifesto was signed by over 100 congressmen relating to maintaining segregation in public places. This tension foreshadowed the events that occurred in Little Rock in 1957. In August of 1954, the NAACP proposed for integration in Little Rock, and eventually, in 1955, the Little Rock School Board adopted the Blossom Plan, which called for gradual integration. As integration moved closer to the reality in the summer of 57, the Mothers League of Central High held its first public meeting and set requests for temporary delay of integration.
This sheet and give it to your homeroom teacher. So there was a certain frivolity, sort of silliness, and my friends and I put our names on the list.
Minnie Jean Brown Trickey, age 15, was greatly looking forward to attending Central and dreamt of singing in the chorus, attending dances, and the potential friendships. Ernest Green, Terrence Roberts, Elizabeth Eckford, Thelma Mothershed, Melba Patillo, Gloria Ray, Jefferson Thomas, and Carlotta Walls Lanier were, like Trickey, applied to be the first African Americans at Central. They had all voluntarily agreed to move to the all-white Central as a part of the city plan. Libraries, parks, and buses were all integrated there. So it may have been slightly odd, despite this being in the Deep South, to those on September 2nd, Governor Orville Faubus, in a televised speech, demanded that the Arkansas National Guard should stop students from entering Central. The school officials informed the students to stay home, while Judge Ronald Davies asked integration to just proceed. The president of the NAACP Arkansas branch, Daisy Bates, played a crucial role in the Little Rock Nine crisis, and on September 4th, asked the students to come with her in a group. Unfortunately, she had forgotten Elizabeth Eckford and had not told her. Elizabeth Eckford ended up walking alone. She narrowly avoided assault and was threatened as she tried to go to the school. She did not make it into the school, and none of the other students did because the Arkansas National Guardsmen were preventing their entrance. The NAACP lawyers, including Thurgood Marshall, won the federal district court injunction to seize the government not allowing students to attend. Martin Luther King Jr. sent a telegram to Eisenhower asking him to take a strong, forthright stand in the Little Rock situation. Begrudgingly, Eisenhower gave in and ordered troops from the Army's 101st Airborne Division to protect students. Eventually, on September 23rd, the 9 students with police escorts entered through the side entrance as the words 2468, "We ain't gonna integrate," were hurled at them. Although they had placed a wooden barricade around the school, they felt the students' safety was at risk and took them home early due to mob violence. And other than the troops of the 101st sent to Little Rock, Eisenhower had federalized much of the Arkansas National Guard to deal with the crisis. The 101st was eventually withdrawn, but the federalized Arkansas National Guard remained there for the rest of the year. The year didn't flow easily for the 9 African American students. They were consistently tormented and assaulted with racial slurs. In mid-fall, a straw effigy was hung to represent a black student and set on fire. The year of integration did allow a small silver lining, as Ernest Green became the first African American to graduate from Central High. Despite the seeming permanence of integration demonstrated with the quelling and resistance by the federal government, the next school year was addressed as the lost year. Faubus ordered a session with the Arkansas General Assembly and released 6 bills. One of the bills was aiming at allowing him to close any schools required to desegregate by federal law. On September 27th, by an overwhelming majority, it was decided that very thing that he was aiming for. 366 students of both black and white skin were kept from public schools. The white and black teachers were still on pay in sans student classrooms. This led to many leaving state, traveling great distances for class, studying to enter college, and taking correspondence courses. 93% of the white students found schools, but 50% of the blacks were unable to engage in academics. Some African Americans found jobs or joined the military. Those who did find academics went far distances and did correspondence courses offered by L.M. Christophe. Chaos didn't just affect students, but also teachers, administrators whose 44 contracts were not renewed for allegedly supporting integration. There was a recall of 3 segregationist board members, and the new members opened up the schools. Schools were planned to open early on the 12th, and it seemed perhaps as if the integration was capable of withstanding the Deep South. Only Elizabeth Eckford and Jefferson Thomas were of the Little Rock Nine to return after the lost year. Looking back on the Little Rock Nine, it's a key to acknowledge the role of influence of media. In an interview conducted through email, Carlotta Walsenier said, "It was because of media exposure that was new to the public, and that probably helped President Eisenhower send in the 101st. We were the second biggest news in 1957. It helped that from 1949 to 1954, the amount of TVs in American homes rose from 1 million to 32 million.
For a year-long bus boycott organized by Dr. Martin Luther King, his first major civil rights battle was won when on November 13, 1956, the Supreme Court ruled against segregated public transportation.
Coverage of black speeches and protests increasingly made the news, and potent videos and images resonated within Americans. Racism wasn't slowly choked by the media, but rather put on a tighter noose. Newspapers and radio were comparatively less powerful, although still powerful, as the words describing a lynching are far less power to the average soul than the remains of Emmett Till. The advancement of civil relations between white and black and the decline of racism are nothing not to be grateful for. Still today, we face repercussions of our past with segregation. A majority of the valuable efforts toward segregation were in the 70s until 1988. From 1988, the number of schools with 10% or fewer whites went from 5.7% to 18.6%. Then from 1991 to 2006, the Supreme Court decisions terminated many desegregation plans. Although the majority of white schools gained diversity, it was only that more schools with fewer whites grew. The number of schools with 10% or less non-white students went from 38.9% to 18.4%. Admittedly, segregation can be a result of geography rather than race, but that's likely not all the case. All this shows is that although compared to the events at the Little Rock Nine, we have to greatly improved, but the U.S. may need to reflect on its racial segregation.